Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pyramid Science Foundation live stream with Lisa Richards and Charlie Zeese.
Hello.
I was waiting for you to say hello, Charlie.
Well, now I'm on screen. I wasn't on screen before.
So let's start with a couple announcements. I'll let you go first, Charlie.
All right. Lisa and I, will be at the, let me get it right, the Spiritual Holistic Expo in Allentown, Pennsylvania this coming weekend. And I'll be talking again about finding the golden ratio in all of the Gothic cathedral steeples. And along that line, I may throw something in, but for those of you who've seen that information before, you know that there's 6 different geometries, all based on exponential powers of phi. I was doing some research over the weekend. I happened to find a drawing of waveforms, and sure enough, I found all these angles in this diagram. I'm trying to reach the person who put this together. I've emailed them to see if we can't get more information on it, but I think we may have found something in the field of harmonics that's going to help us to understand why those 6 different geometries are actually in the Gothic cathedral steeples. And it all seems to come down to harmonics. So anyway, for those of you in the area, we look forward to seeing you this weekend. And all of our products will be on sale for those attending the expo. So hope you'll stop by our booth and say hello. And I will be speaking at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock Saturday morning. So
Yeah, I can't remember the exact time, but it's 10 or 11, I believe.
okay. I'm
Yeah,
blurry.
wave your hand in front of your camera, Charlie. It might, when you backed up a little bit, it kind of auto-focused.
Let's see. There we go. I think it's better now. Well,
No, I don't know what's going on.
yeah, a little better.
There's a
I'm
little
not
better.
quite so foggy anymore.
So just a couple announcements from me. My experiments with plants have been put on hold for a little while. I still haven't even had time to start my seeds, but I want to focus mainly is what I'm focusing on is the BioWell training. It's going to be so important to get the thorough training that we need in order to run our experiments. And so that's what I'm focusing on. Next month, summer solstice. Is that next month? Yeah, June. Oh my goodness, it's going to be June
Yes,
next month.
half the year.
Serpent Mound. So I'm going to be at the expo in Serpent Mound. I don't think Charlie's going to be able to go to that one. It's quite a ways for him to travel, and it's an outdoor event too. But they're going to have some cool workshops and things like that. And we're going to manifest some good weather for that week.
Okay.
And then another thing too, I just posted and updated our event calendar. So we do have some events coming up in August as well. The Pyramid Spiritual Societies Movement Mega Meditation Summit. That's going to be the end of August. So there's a lot of cool details on our event calendar about that. And we'll talk about that later on, as well as some other upcoming events that we have in the fall. But let's bring on our amazing guest today. This is going to be an exciting talk, you guys. Hi, Ray. How are you?
Oh, hi. I'm on stage. Look at that.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
you are.
It's so great to be with both of you today and
Oh,
your audience. Yeah.
Awesome. So, guys, today we're going to talk about the hidden power of nature, where we will unravel the secrets of harnessing Mother Nature's innate electricity with the co-administrator of the largest electroculture community online, Ray Lee Bacon of Energetic Growers. So we're so excited to have him today. And we've had Matt Roski on before to just briefly touch on electroculture, but Ray's been doing this for a long time. So he's going to delve into it way deeper and explain a lot of things, including using pyramid energy to grow, right?
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. I hope we can get into that. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me read a couple of things about Ray real quick. Ray Lee Bacon is an award-winning organic gardener renowned for producing high-quality, nutrient-dense food in compact spaces. A nutritionist-turned-farmer, Ray combines his deep understanding of health with a passion for mysticism, creating a unique approach to garden design. And he has an amazing garden design to share today as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So how'd you get into garden? How did you get into all the electroculture?
Well, how did I get into electroculture? Well, I was a farmer for about 10 years and focusing on mixed vegetable production, high rotation, market gardening, salad mixes, microgreens, doing a lot of intensive production. And while I was doing that, I was integrating microbes and biochar and soil regenerative practices, mineral density, all these principles in what we were doing as farmers. And I had someone come and visit here in Italy, and he introduced me to electroculture. His name is Andrea Donnelly, and he is an excellent, excellent practitioner of electroculture here in Italy. And he showed me spirals. That was the gateway, right? As it is for people in our community, our electroculture beginners to advanced community. Spiral antennas are the gateway. And that's what he did. He brought these little antennas, Lakowski coils. And I positioned that in the back of my head. I was like, this is really novel. This is really neat. But I was running a commercial farm. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the mental bandwidth to tinker and experiment at least properly. And I did a few things and I saw results, but I couldn't scale it. And I was just kind of running by the seat of my pants as a farmer, working 50 hours a week. And honestly, it was an emotional roller coaster. And I kept that in my back pocket. And eventually, a few experiences happened in my life that prodded me a little deeper and forced me to uncover this whole world of electroculture and this whole world of consciousness and how it influences plants. And everything else changed after that.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it too, is the consciousness of the person
Mm.
doing the experiments really creates the outcome of the experiment as well. Did you find that to happen a lot?
Absolutely. I mean, this is actually something that I typically rarely speak about in our community. Not a lot of people are ready to hear that.
Yeah.
I hope many of your listeners here are, and I presume they are.
Oh, yes.
Um, you know, can I share a story about that?
Yes,
Sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, because this is something that happened to me years ago, and it radically changed the way I view plants, nature, and my role with life. I've been an avid meditator for many years, and I'm 36 now, and in my late teens, early 20s, when I first started meditating, I created this little altar, and I had it on top of a coffee table. Okay, and I'd sit there on a meditation pad on the floor, and every day for a routine, I would meditate, mindfulness, etc., heart-based meditation. And imagine this table, right? Imagine it's about this big, and I'm sitting right here, and right at the corner of the room on one side, and the corner of the room on the other side, there are two windows. Okay, I'm in the center up here, and on either side of the coffee table are two potted plants. Here they are, growing towards the light sources on either side of the room. Yet, with a daily practice, as I'm sitting dead center, I was focusing on an altar. So I had some crystals, some tarot cards. I was practicing some types of magic, etc., symbols, ultimately. And I was giving myself in an offering to whatever I was mirroring back. And the weirdest thing started to happen. These two plants, which otherwise had been growing towards the primary light sources,
Mhm.
gradually started to pivot and open their leaves towards the place I sat.
Hmm.
And I noticed that the way that the fractaling pattern of the plants began to develop, they seemed to mirror not just the light source, but also the altar and the place in which I sat, creating this effect that was very obvious. And when I experienced that, I didn't know what to do with it. I put it in the back of my pocket, proverbially speaking, and I left it there. And years later, as I got into gardening, I got into farming, and I started to do, I can't say experiments. I want to make a distinction for our audience, your audience listening. Um, Tinkering is the word I'd like to use, because experiments implies that there's scientific rigor, there's double blind, there's different parameters in check, and you have larger sample groups, which is all important to validate things. But we're tinkerers. Most of us are just dabbling, and we're using our own experience, and that's completely valid. And I don't want to reduce that, but it's an important distinction. And through tinkering over time and observation, I've seen this play out in different ways. And I didn't expect our conversation to go in the realm of consciousness, but this is something that underlying what we do with electroculture, consciousness is an important element. And if you don't integrate that with conscious intent, meaning that you are wanting to direct your consciousness as to what you're doing with love, with an intention to create more life and support life, not work against nature, not try to redirect nature for your whims, then your results are going to be greater.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, there's a lot of other stories we could go on, but that is something that is fundamental.
Well, the shape of the pyramid, the Russian geometry pyramid that we focus on, it's an
Mm,
antenna, it's an amplifier of energy. And we always tell people when you use it for meditation, you need to be very mindful of your intentions before you sit inside of it, because it is an amplifier of energy. If
mm,
you're in a bad mood, it will amplify your bad mood. So intention,
interesting.
yeah, intention fuels so many things in our world, and people are unaware of it. I think a lot of people, though, are becoming more knowledgeable on it, and are looking into more things like esoteric and the unknown, because they want to
Well,
know the truth.
they want to see deeper, past the
Yeah.
veil. And, you know, it's one thing to know this sort of thing through words and through reading books and experiencing, but experiential knowledge is fundamentally different. And, I forgot these lessons, when I got into farming, and I basically became a robot. I was working 50 plus hours a week and working in straight lines, just planting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plants a week in the ground, like pumping them in, pumping them in, pumping them in, pumping them in, harvest, 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 one after another, in hopes to make profit to support my family, because farming's a modest income. I forgot these things, and I was experiencing disease pressure after disease pressure on
Mm.
plants. We did it organically, we did it regeneratively, but the consciousness piece just started to fall away, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and I was operating from a place of lack, a place of sometimes anger, frustration with hardships, problem solving, and I got to see it in the opposite way, that it's not just our love that influences life, it's also our anger, it's
Oh,
our
sure.
sadness, it's the weight that we hold. And experiencing that firsthand, and not having a place to anchor it, because I never slowed down enough to really center back into this wisdom. Um, I was creating the very conditions that were creating my unhappiness, and the plants were mirroring that.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible trap, because I think a lot of us in different areas of our lives, we go through this. So what brought me into electroculture was this wake up. It was this realization that, hey, what I've forgotten so many things that I once knew to be true. And in essence, it started to breathe a new sense of purpose, a new sense of life back into this angst, this anxiety that I was feeling. And that's why I become so passionate about it from here on out, and why I'm, doing what I can with the work that we do. And hopefully we can share some techniques as well in this chat
Sure.
together.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mm.
Sure.
Well,
One,
oh, go ahead, Charlie.
I was just an analogy. Carol and I have been watching a lot of veterinary shows on TV. We're trying to get away from the murder mystery series. And the reason why that's important, we've been watching a series of a veterinarian from Alaska, and she's made some really powerful comments recently. For example, that, I mean, all of the wild animals in Alaska, and I'm sure it's true everywhere, have much better immune systems than
Mm.
domesticated animals. And so I've started to wonder in my mind whether, the kinds of agricultural, techniques that we've used and so forth haven't, had such a negative, and I know they have negative impact on our food supply, and whether that, in fact, isn't just such a major, major component of why the wild animals are still, have great immune function, but domesticated animals who eat the same stuff, maybe different parts of components of what we eat, but then we eat them as well. So, I mean, it's not a surprise. So, you know,
Well,
it's
that's a
really cool.
very interesting rabbit hole.
It
If I
is.
may, Charlie,
Sure.
because I find that to be a very neat surprise. Because my professional background was in nutrition, holistic
Hmm.
nutrition. I studied that in Western Canada. I'm Canadian. I moved to Italy. I have a family here, a homestead.
Hmm.
But my passion was always about food. It was always about understanding how holistic nutrition can truly become holistic, integrating soil sciences, integrating microbiology, integrating now what's become the energetic principle of things. But there are so many strings to pull on when it comes to the challenges that we're facing with chronic disease epidemics, immunological disorders.
Yeah.
Um, I've struggled myself with some intestinal immunological challenges. I was born extremely premature. Um, I missed the entire third trimester and spent the early developmental phase in an incubator in isolation.
Hmm.
And I didn't get the microbiome that I needed to thrive, and my immune system doesn't function as well as it should. And this got me onto the quest of nutrition, wanting to
Hmm.
heal myself. So, sorry, I'm just going to close this WhatsApp. I'm hearing any beeps, but um, and that got me on this quest initially because of my own illnesses. And it got me into the realm of wild nutrition as well, and wanting to
Hmm.
understand wild ecosystems and how they interact with life in a way that is fundamentally different than domesticated plants. And a good example that is really interesting, at least for me, hopefully for you guys as well, um, is the fact that, oh my gosh, sorry, this is what happens when we go live, because I just have a call coming through, unfortunately, here. Using my phone camera is obviously not the best thing. There we go. I'll let that pass, because unless it's emergency, I never get calls. Never get. Um, there we go. So my apologies. Let me go here. Did you guys even hear the ring? Was it ringing
A little
on?
bit. It
Did you?
sounded like you were
A little
riding
bit.
in an elevator. You're okay.
Well, maybe it gives me a chance to ground myself a little more on this. So, for emphasis on the wild carrot, okay, Daucus, the Daucus variety of carrot, which is white, fibrous, um, not this bright orange carrot that's juicy and sweet.
Right.
If you take domesticated carrot seeds and you broadcast them wild into a field, within 3 generations, those carrots that are juicy and sweet will revert back to their wild
Real.
progenitor,
Wow.
meaning that within those genetics, those epigenetics within the seeds, there are the codes of its ancestral genes.
Hmm.
And the part there that's really strange is if you do this in a cultivated field, in an agricultural context, surrounded by other domesticated plants, it will not revert back to its wild progenitor. Now,
Oh,
there are many reasons for that, but the one from an energetic standpoint, excluding microbes, excluding the microbial interactions of a wild ecosystem, has to do in part with energetic signatures of ecological stacking ecological organisms together, is that there's a harmonic effect, much like an orchestra, that when you have multi parts playing in sequence together, they start to entrain together,
Okay.
right? Like
Sure.
humans in an orchestra where your
Hmm.
heart rhythms start to entrain. The same
Hmm.
principle is happening within the nexus, within the DNA, that code locked up in the seed itself, and suddenly life reverts back to its ideal blueprint, not what we're trying to create. And under those circumstances, the wild version is going to have phytochemicals, unique compounds that will protect it from predation, protect it from disease, unlike the domesticated version, which is going to be an onslaught to insects that want to destroy it because it doesn't belong in nature.
that's
And
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
tragic too, because when you think of humans, does that mean that we're aliens from our environment?
No, I'm sure.
But it also is, there's saving grace, because it means that within all of us, we have the ability to revert back to some level of holism.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
there's a doctor in another country. I couldn't even, I'd have to look into it a little bit more, but I believe he heals people utilizing that same type of situation. Like, for instance, if a person is dying of liver cancer on their
Mm,
deathbed, he can
mm,
shine a laser through the liver of a healthy person. So the healthy person would be there, shine the liver
wow.
through the healthy person's liver, pick up the genetic code for that healthy liver with the laser and shine it into the liver of the person dying, and instantly they'll start recovering. Isn't that
Mm.
crazy? But it makes sense.
That goes into the Russian researchers and the use of
Yeah.
frog eggs and
Yeah.
salamander eggs, whatever, and mixing them to create, you know, chimeras or different organisms. I mean, it's
Right. Right. Now, this
but
isn't Luc
yeah.
Montagnier, is it? Who was doing this experiment?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I don't think that's the right name.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing him up, it sounds very similar. Luc Montagnier is a Nobel Prize winning scientist from France, and he originally took two vials of one had DNA in it, and the other one had uh, uh, distilled water with nothing in it.
Mm,
And he shone a light through, and sure enough, 72 hours later, there was DNA in the water that, just like you were talking about, he's shown it through the first tube with DNA in it, and sure enough, 3 days later, there was DNA in there. So, yes, fascinating results. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because he was given, he contracted what the skeptics call the Nobel disease
That's
because
right.
he, yeah, so they
Which
couldn't
is
get
just so arrogant, is it not? I mean,
that's right. That's right. Because they didn't want people to know that this could actually occur. So he lost all of his funding for research in France and is now running a lab for the Chinese in China. So there you
Oh,
go.
wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
one of our viewers,
homeopathy. No?
Charles Milligan, said photonic holographic treatment similar to how the med beds supposedly work.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But
So
With sorry, go on. Yeah, I
Ray,
didn't
are
interrupt.
you familiar with ORMUS, orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements,
I
monoatomic gold?
I have heard about Ormus, and I have heard about particularly silica and calcium, and I have seen some in the nutritional world. I've definitely seen how one can have a diet that is abstaining from certain minerals and yet not develop the deficiencies. Um, and there's been some experiments with animals as well, and so that is
Yeah.
a whole. This is very bizarre because it's going into the idea that there's a there's a geometric component to life, right?
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
the fundamental principles of the way things organize together is going to influence the outcome.
oh sure.
So the reason
And
I brought up the Ormus is because some experimenters or tinkerers with the product have discovered that it can revert even GMOs back to a more healthy state, like the seed, kind of like how you said with the carrots. So I'd assume, that original genetic code is in there as well, and that's what it's doing.
by fertilizing plants with Ormus
Yeah, so then you
minerals.
save the seeds, the next generation will resort back, I believe, is what I'm
Interesting.
hearing, but I
So
haven't tried it myself.
what for me, what this implies is that for me is that there is I think the universe is some holographic pattern of interconnected
Oh sure.
geometry, and that we are in essence damaging fractals in a way through our hubris, right? As we worship our creations as opposed to worshiping the creation itself. But it means that in practical terms, I think we can do a lot. We can do a lot with working with plants, working with animals, in a way that can and ourselves, that can bring greater wholeness, health, and well-being. Um, and electroculture plays a role in that. For those
Yeah,
who don't know the term electroculture, if I define its term, electroculture in general terms means the use of electricity and magnetism or electromagnetism to stimulate and facilitate healthier organisms, particularly plants and microorganisms in soil. Um, I'd like to expand that a bit further to include not just electromagnetism, but subtle energies as well. Energies that we have not fully understood through reductionist, materialist means. Um, there are probably more than one camp in the realm of electroculture. Those are those who definitely only look at the mechanical components that can be measured and monitored. Most of the community, however, are loving the woo, are loving the fringes, and are wanting to see more of pyramid science, human consciousness, harmonizers, and all of these things that for
yeah,
some is rather sacrilegious to kind of blend together. But I like to blend it together because it pushes the boundaries of what's possible.
Mhm.
Absolutely. One of the first experiments that I did when I got into organic gardening, I also got into redworm composting. And I
Mm.
fell upon an article from a fisherman who had a cup of red worms. He was going to go fishing the next day. He put it in his garage. Um, and the next day he went to get the worms, and they had eaten through the styrofoam cup and were attached to the south side of a horseshoe magnet. And so
Well,
that really piqued my interest because I was just getting into pyramid energy and magnetism. And I had the red worm, so I did a control and the experiment and put the south side. I can't remember the Gauss, but they were neodymium magnets with the south side facing in. And after 30 days, the experiment, the control group was pretty much the same. You know, there was a
and
few eggs.
was this on a horizontal axis or a vertical axis? The
They were
magnet.
facing horizontal. It was a
Okay.
horizontal axis. But I have redworm bins now that I use it on a vertical axis. So I've done it both
But
ways. But
the magnet itself, the poles, the south and the north poles of the magnet, did you have them vertically aligned or horizontally aligned?
they were facing vertically. Or I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I believe so. Um, but I've done it both ways. So it works both ways, it seems.
Which this is interesting on the magnetic field. I mean,
It has to be
worms
the
use
south.
the magnetic field in order to orient themselves and know what direction they should travel in order to go underground. Besides light, of course, but
Yeah.
they have magnetoreceptivity, and we do too. I mean, and both of you, I'm sure, are well aware of that.
Yep.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and Aborigines are certainly better aware of that than we are, and the ability to, well, historically, to migrate hundreds and sometimes up to 1,000 kilometers nomadically over vast distances in the hottest, driest, flattest continent on the earth and find water in 40 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, um, and survive. So we have these latent, dormant faculties, and this goes back to the premise of reverting back to our progenitors,
Yes.
our ancient ancestors. If we can morphologically revert back through certain means, right, a certain diet, lifestyle, activity, grounding with the earth, being in connection with living ecosystems, nature, right? Because if a seed has its roots in the soil and its antenna into the heavens. I mean, we're moving around. If a plant can in a few generations revert back to its progenitor, if our living environment is mirroring natural our natural lifeblood, right? If our
Yeah.
architecture, if our gardens, our designs with nature, if this mirrors principles, fundamental principles of nature, like you work a lot with fundamental geometries,
Sure.
with pyramid technology, and in cathedrals and these things, right? That Renaissance workers knew, ancients knew about these principles. If we mirror these principles in the work that we do, inevitably we're going to become more vital because we're mirroring the natural heavens. And this is why, when doing pyramid research with plants and with seeds in particular, the results are staggering.
Mhm.
Pyramid charging of seeds,
Yep.
pre-charging of seeds. You work a lot with the 76,
Mhm.
76.36. The
Three,
is
four,
that
five. Yeah,
the
close enough. Well, yeah.
pretty close?
Yeah, that's close.
That's the
No one's ever perfect. You
spherical.
can't ever get it perfectly right. So that's the reason I'm making light of it. But yeah, yeah, it's an arrangement.
That's like when I was working with making my first pyramids out of copper pipes for the use of seed charging using the Giza chaos
Sure,
dimensions. And
sure.
I was using 52 degrees mistaken with the 41 degrees. Because there's the base angle and then there's the vertices angles, which are
Yeah.
slightly different.
Yeah.
And but when I got it right, and I started to dabble with seed charging, placing seeds inside the pyramid when it's oriented with the Earth's magnetic field, right? Using a compass. A phone compass works really well because it's got a straight edge and you can align it with the pyramid itself, the base angle,
Right.
and that's quite nice. And when I did that, I started to notice that seeds would germinate 3 to 4 days earlier than seeds that were not underneath the pyramid. And what I take away from this is implying that it's not just, geometry is a principle here, but it is aligning the fundamental mathematical constants of nature and harmonizing with these principles.
That's
That
right.
is having some stimulatory effect on life. And what does that mean to me? Fundamentally, it means that all of our design, whether it's using these principles or not, is influencing life, right? Our postmodern, ugly, straight row city streetscapes, or our industrial farms that are running in straight rows, planting the crops in straight rows. I planted forests when I was in my early 20s. It paid for my studies. And we sometimes would plant thousands of trees a day in straight rows. And now that these forests are maturing, I'm now hearing reports of black bears that are going crazy and ripping the trees out of the ground.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, rebelling. They're suddenly starting to rebel and go, I can't live in this territorial environment. It's driving me mad. So nature wants to find its own equilibrium. And this is the work that I do with my background in permaculture that got me out of farming, has moved into garden designing, ecosystem designing, and using intuitive systems. I work with pendulums, I work with dowsing rods. I work in a way that is shutting off my logical brain and tapping into an intuitive place in order to design and locate where important tree species might go, locate where important features on the land, standing stones, mirroring standing stones with artificial versions, what I and others call power towers, which enter into the realm of electroculture, using these principles so that we don't have to think about the mathematics per se. We don't have to think about aligning different sites together like ancient sites that align in grid patterns of mathematical precisions over vast geographies. That if we can tap into this grace, then suddenly we can start to design in a way that mirrors these principles without having to use our logical mind. And the result is that nature thrives. Maybe this is a good moment to segue into a screen share, if you could, Lisa, of the Galaxy Garden design, if we could speak a little bit about that, because this is a project that I had the honor of doing when I got out of farming post-COVID. And let's take a look at some of the comments as well, if there are anything in here that stand out. Lisa or Charlie?
Well, there's one thing I wanted to pick up. Lynette Robertson corrected something I said earlier. Luc Montagnier apparently passed on a couple of years ago. I had lost track of him, but he apparently, is no longer with us. But anyway, that's
Let's go over your slides here, and then I'm sure people will have
yeah,
questions.
yeah,
Sure, great. So this project, I mentioned my work with dowsing and earth energies and working with subterranean forces. Um, I had the honor of working with this location, which has its roots at a very special place. If you look in the foreground here, you can see that there are these holes in the landscape. They're caves actually, dug out between the trees and the background there. Do you see those? There's
yes,
black
Oh
marks.
yeah. Hmm.
Throughout this particular property, there are these Etruscan, which are pre-Roman. Ancient Etruscans were matriarchal. They worked with the earth. They worked with the female energies, and they had in this location burial grounds, necropolises, and this site was very sacred to them. Um, and I really wanted to revere the history of this site when working with this design. I built this galaxy garden in the shape of a galaxy, 8 sides, 8 spurs, on top of an Etruscan cave that was dug out by hand more than 100 feet, more than 200 feet rather, burrowed under the ground in a straight line. The
wow,
Etruscans had dug this out for reasons I don't quite know. Um, and I used a pendulum to indicate where to orient this place in honor of the Etruscans and harmonizing with subterranean energies. What are referred to as conductivity discontinuities. When you have different geological strata below the grade, the subterranean, the grade, you get movements of water, you get movements of telluric currents. These are passing electrons and subtle pulses of energy and magnetism of the earth. When you get geological fissures, this is a very high tectonic area. When these particular disruptions intersect, they create vortices of energy that pulsate in a spiraling pattern upwards. And this creates a unique electromagnetic signature that can be beneficial or can be harmful for living organisms. You can see distortions in plants and trees in the way they spiral, that they can spiral in the opposite direction that they're supposed to. They can bend in different directions. There are physiological features on the landscape that can be monitored. And I was wanting to create a design that could mirror these underground forces with the cosmos above. Now, I don't know whether I could actually do that per se, but that was my intention with the design.
hmm
And that's why we did it in the way we did. But the most bizarre experience I had, and I don't share this often, and I think your listeners will probably like this story. It's a bit spooky. Um, when I dowsed this site, uh, the 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 property owner, he wanted to put a power tower. He wanted to put a tower on top, basically an artificial menhir, which is a standing stone, much like Stonehenge or
okay,
dolmens, these sort of things. He wanted to put one in the center. And when I dowsed that, the ancestors of the land, they kept insisting, you cannot put this object here. You cannot put this object here. And he wanted to go through with it. And I kept saying, we can't do this. We can't, for what it's worth, the ancestors are telling me that this is not appropriate for this. And fortunately he agreed. But the following day, so that night, after I dowsed this spot, My kids were sick. We all sleep in a loft together in our farmhouse, and I thought I need to get good sleep, so I slept on the couch. And adjacent to where I was sleeping was a big glass door window that was facing a big open expansive sky. And at 4 in the morning, when I woke up at 4 in the morning, suddenly it's like something jolted me out of my sleep. I look out, I open my eyes, and I'm looking out at the stars, and it's a perfectly bright night. And there's a star that is, it's like it's beckoning me. And I'm staring at it, I'm looking at it closely, and suddenly it starts to move. And I kid you not, it starts to take on this orientation, much like a UFO would, right? Like a UFO. And it's moving in a way that doesn't make any sense. And it would stop and it would go in another direction. And immediately I got out of bed. It was like it woke me out of my sleep. And I thought to myself, whoa, this is strange. This is otherworldly. This is something wanting to communicate with me. I thought to myself, do I want to communicate with this? I was a little bit concerned, actually, because not all stories of aliens are positive.
Right.
I pulled out my pendulum, as a dowser does, and I sat down at my kitchen table looking out the window, and I turned the light on above my head, and it's this big ball of light sitting above dim light. And I asked the first question I ask is, can I communicate with this light that I'm seeing? No, the first question rather was, does this craft or whatever it is have an intelligence? And my pendulum starts doing these massive arcs, and it's like, whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, I calm down a little bit, and then the next question I ask is, can I communicate with this directly? And the light above my head starts to flicker on and off, whoop, whoop, pulsing. And I paused for a moment, and I was like, I don't know if I don't actually want to. I'm not ready to call in whatever this is. I don't know if it's benevolent. I don't know if it's malevolent. I thought it was benevolent, but I left it at that. And I took that as a very strange synchronicity of working with this galaxy garden. It was almost like I was calling on some other force that I don't fully understand. And for what it's worth, after this experience, I didn't see this work quite the same way. It was initially, it was an artistic expression that then started to blend into how can I harmonize as best I can with the landscape? How can I harmonize with the cosmos? How can this little microcosm here be an intermediary between the heavens and the earth? And how can my heart, my consciousness, and the plants that are growing therein spread this energy horizontally outwards in a way that has a positive ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
on life? And that was the nexus. That was the focus of this Galaxy Garden project.
Cool.
And
Let me show the couple other pictures of it here.
Sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's it above. It has an area of about 150 square meters. If I think in feet, each one of these spurs, which is about 15 meters long, so 15 meters. So the length of each of these spurs is in feet. That is, I don't know, maybe 100 feet to 30 meters. So 50 feet long.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
by 1.5 meters wide, so I think about 5 feet wide. So there's a lot of area here, and about initially the first design had 150 different edible, medicinal, and therapeutic plant species, um, alternating with annual plants for vegetable production, with perennial plants for medicine and therapy. Um, and it blended flowers and herbs together in a way that attracted this incredible amount of biological diversity, insects, um, lizards, all kinds of pollinators. It was an incredible project. I'm so honored to work with this design. Um, and surrounded by, it was like a little oasis surrounded by all of the dead standing grasses around it. It was quite something. And unfortunately, this person is now, with his property, is now fighting this massive monoculture of windmills and
Mm.
photovoltaic cells on an industrial scale that is to be built up all around him. Um, but it is a little nexus, a little pocket of peace, and very beautiful to work in as well. Mm.
Well, I know Freddie Silva travels around, and
I
he's
love
been
Freddie Sola.
he's been researching sacred temples for a long time, and he actually has a course that you can purchase to build your own sacred temple based on the geometries of the ones he's measured around the earth, and one is specifically for growing. That a lot of people are
I
finding that
I
it's specific for
I did
growing.
Freddie Sola. I did this very course.
Did
And
you?
yeah, and one of the things that, I love his work on orienting stones or crystals in different directions and aligning things under these principles and
Some are
combining.
male,
And I
some are female.
yeah, and I worked with a lot of these principles when I did this design. But what I tend to do with my gridding work when I work with clients is I do it in an invisible way. I do it in a way that isn't always seen, because I love the female smooth shape, like this galaxy garden. I love the spiral shapes. I love the undulations, and less the masculine form that tends to occur with this kind of intentional gridding, which has its place. The male and female energies are important. But when it comes to the actual design of plant species and where to place them, I use more of a feminine approach. And I take the male energy in the gridding, and I do that with different structures. I bury cones, paramagnetic cones. I bury crystals under the ground. Sometimes I just work with intention, where I literally draw it out, um, on the landscape with intention. I anchor it in. Sometimes I even do it remotely with some people to do it through remote work. And I find that less is more. That this is where the consciousness element comes in. It's that it isn't always about the design. Sometimes it's about our intention and how we go through the ritual of the design in order to
Yeah.
anchor in the principles we want to evoke.
Absolutely. I treat my plants like they're my children. And my dad,
Mm.
who has very negative energy, he loves gardening as well. But I absolutely dislike when he comes back and wants to look in my greenhouse. I'm like, that don't want that negative
Mm.
energy in there. But thank you for
Well,
sharing the design. It's beautiful.
sometimes negative energy can actually have a positive outcome. One of the things I do when working with cannabis growers is one of the things I always encourage growers to do, actually, is to take someone who so I it's important to distinguish, Lisa. In your garden, you are the steward. You are the
Mhm.
principal steward interacting with your plants. and they form an entrainment with you that is energetic. Not just the dependence that occurs with the water and the nutrient, but your love and care. But we all need stress in our lives, right? We all know that a little bit of stress goes a long way. If you don't expose yourself to stress, you become weak, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And with plants, and with cannabis is a great example, one thing I encourage people to do, and it can go with other medicinal plants as well, it's just cannabis growers tend to want to, pump more money into their systems. What you can do is you get someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your plants. Well, might know you, but doesn't know your plants very well, doesn't know your space, to go there in the shroud at night, perhaps, and the edges of daylight, with the explicit intent to emotionally emit harm on your plants. To literally go there and start shaking your plants, even yelling at your plants. It stresses them out, but in doing so, without killing them or damaging them physically, what happens is the plant responds to that stress to produce its secondary metabolites. These are the unique chemical compounds. In the case of cannabis, they're the terpene molecules that give it its unique flavor profile. It can even be the cannabinoids themselves. It increases the concentration of these compounds because the plant uses these compounds in order to deal with predation, in order to ward off insects, in order to deal with the person who is coming there to inflict stress.
Oh, wow.
And the end result is you have a plant that is more robust, is able to deal with environmental factors, lack of rain, too much sunshine, insect stress, stress in general, in a way that is going to ward it off. And the end result is a product that has a higher essential oil compound concentration and a higher amount of nutrient density. Because the mineral density in plants is directly associated with the diversity of phytochemistry, the diversity of geometry in the different molecules inside that plant itself. And the plant will produce more of these compounds under stress. And when you look at it from an atomic standpoint, the greater the amount of complexity in the molecules, there's a direct relationship to the greater amount of diversity in minerals, because the different minerals have different functions within the molecules. So the end result is you get a plant that is uptaking and absorbing more minerals and locking it in its cell matrix. So when you eat those plants, they're going to be more nutrient dense.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
not coddling your plants.
Yeah.
The steward,
The
if you're a
steward
mother,
will coddle.
you need to give your kids lots of love, but you need to expose them to some stress. You
But
need to
so it
expose
makes
them to something.
sense.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense that you would have somebody else do that to stress them out because, Cleve Baxter's experiments with plants
Mm,
in the 70s, I think it was, he proved they had consciousness and that they had memory and that they retained that memory if somebody were to stress them out or, hurt
absolutely.
another plant, and they would communicate through the network, through the ether with all the other plants around as well,
Mm.
warning them that this person has harmed us in some way.
Mm. Yeah, and plants do that with insects as well. And if you have an
Yeah.
oak tree that produces tannins in order to defend itself from predation, one bite on one oak tree through the mycorrhizal net will send that information out to other trees in that net so that they can then defend themselves as well. But this only occurs in ecosystems. It's not occurring in straight row farming because there isn't, I mean, you can have mycorrhizal fungi added in
Yeah.
artificially. But if you start to work in ecological principles, then you start to get this resiliency that occurs, this unseen resiliency. And there's also an energetic component too, which I think is just as important. So
I,
I
Yeah.
see we're at that hour mark. Golly.
Yeah. Let's read. I
already.
don't think there's any questions yet, but we'll read a couple comments and then we're definitely going
Sure.
to have you back on, Ray, for, to go more in depth.
I'd love to. We didn't even really talk about pyramids and the use of
No,
electroculture.
that's okay. We'll do it another time.
Yeah, for
Lovely.
sure.
Before you start, Lisa, I have a question though that's on
Yeah.
point with all of this. I wanted to go back and make sure I understood. Did you say that the cannabinoids that are produced by the plant are a defensive mechanism? Did I hear you correctly?
Well, honestly, I could be wrong on that
Well,
because
you may be right. I don't know. It's an interesting.
I know for sure that the terpene compounds are used
Okay.
often as defense. They can even be used to attract certain insects, certain pollinators, these compounds, they work as defense, they also work as offense, they also work to harmonize. And with cannabinoids themselves, um, they do have psychotropic effects on. This is what I see it as. When I say defense, I once had a few cannabis plants that had stems that were this thick, and I came back the following morning, and they were as tall as I was, 4 plants, and they were eaten by deer right down to the base. Had eaten the whole stem and
Oh
all.
my. Yeah.
And that's a situation that this is an opportunity to learn, because after that, instead of being angry, I had the wherewithal to reflect on it, and I thought to myself, and this comes to your question, Charlie. In nature, if a deer was to have a lot of CBD and relax its nervous system, right?
Hmm.
Reduce its ability to trigger a sympathetic response, right? Which
Hmm.
is a stress response.
Right.
Artificially induce a parasympathetic response and be slightly psychoactively impaired on its ability to orient itself in space, right? And its
Right.
environment.
Hmm.
What is the result of that? It's not going to be able to deal with a predator the same way.
True.
And the
True.
end result is that animal is more likely to be predated upon. And
Right.
then what is the result of that? You have a mechanism in which the overall predators to that particular plant and others, because cannabis is an apex organism within ecosystems because of its unique phytochemistry. Its signature is that it is an apex, meaning that it is a protector of an ecosystem. It means that it creates a balance that then is going to have an overall effect on reducing predation on the cannabis plants, but also the ecosystem itself. So, yes,
Okay.
cannabinoids in in some regard can be seen as a defense compound, because what other reason would the plant have? You know, yeah, there's benefit to humans as well, and
Sure.
our ability to deal with stress is important in the modern age, but in a Paleolithic era, where we co-evolved with cannabis plants, if we
Sure.
misuse those plants from an evolutionary standpoint, um, our genes would be less likely to proliferate.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I have a quick question. I know with the Russian research, they said that when a toxin is put inside the pyramid, that it will neutralize the toxicity of it. But if like a beneficial, let's say a medicine, like an antibiotic or whatever, was put in it, it would increase the potency of it. So,
Mm.
what do you think it's increasing the THC with the pyramid as well? Like, what do you think the effects are for that?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's not literally changing the chemical compounds in some manner, in the sense it's not replicating THC or CBD or other cannabinoids. So it's not literally increasing the potency in that sense from a material standpoint. But my view, and you guys might have a similar view or otherwise, but when I work with the Giza dimension of the pyramid, I see it as a harmonizer in the sense that it is mirroring the spherical geometry of the earth. It's mirroring the geometry in our bodies as well. And what I see it as when I work with it in geomancy and using geomancy to place a pyramid on a landscape, I see it as an amplifier,
Mhm.
in the sense that, yes, it's taking the energy of place and amplifying that for good or for bad. And maybe what you're saying that it can neutralize, but I kind of disagree. I don't know about that exact example, and I may be wrong, but I tend to work on the path of caution, because when I work with people, I always the pyramid power is something that I work with last, because it's my opinion that if not done properly, you know, appropriate geometry, appropriate placement, appropriate reverence, that it can have a negative effect. This is my view, and I think it's an amp. It particularly when it's done in a landscape in someone's home, it can amplify for good or for bad the consciousness of space.
Mhm.
And and so for what that's worth, that can be one's medicine. It can be one's poison as well.
Yeah. I would love to do some experiments on, what it's really doing to like grow, like the THC content in marijuana by growing inside of a pyramid, or psychedelics. Does it enhance the psychedelic properties of mushrooms, or does it lessen them? It'd be
Mm,
interesting to do some experiments with that. But we do have one question real quick, and then we're going to call it a day,
sure. Yeah, I
guys.
wish we could go longer. I really enjoy this call. It's a lot of
Yes,
fun.
most certainly. Last year, I had short, straight paths in my garden and grew lots of leaves and not much food. This year, the paths are long smiles in the direction the wind blows
Mm.
most. Do you think this could help the growth?
This year, the paths are long smiles. That's a beautiful way to say it. And the direction of the wind blows most. So what I can say is that when working with garden design and permaculture design, the fundamental principles is to work with the environmental factors most that are most gross, first. This is your wind, this is your sun angles, this is your soil. The energetic side of things, is something. It's the icing on the cake. If you don't get the foundational principles, good sound horticulture practices right, if you don't get good sound in environmental factors right, with your design, it doesn't matter whether you orient your beds in the shape of a smile. If you don't have enough water, your plants aren't going to thrive. So start with the fundamental principles. And then when it comes to designing your space in an undulated form as opposed to straight rows, it's my opinion that there is an influence. Um, many people would argue against that, but what I see is that when you're working with natural shapes, it's not always the shape itself that's having the impact. It requires more intent and focused attention to create these shapes. And if you do that from a place of love, you do that from a place of reverence and respect for nature, and you're wanting to create something that's natural, the end result is going to be a net positive, no matter what shape you do. And then if you start to blend into some real funky shapes that are working with sacred geometry and principles of mathematics and gridding and some of these considerations, then I think there is a spiritual and energetic influence that is occurring.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, well, that's awesome. Thank you for the question. The
Yeah.
person who asked that question said, "This is exactly what I've been trying to find information on." That was one of the first comments from them. So people are really liking the show, and we will definitely
Wonderful.
have Ray back on because we didn't even touch on a lot of the things that we had intended to. So there's so much
We,
to talk about.
we have
May I,
one more,
may
Lisa, if we have time for it.
I'd love to go if
Well, we've got one more quick one. Something is eating my strawberry leaves. I think the lizards. What do we do to have symbiotic garden with critters to keep them from eating everything?
so. My thought maybe is that symbiotic.
Yeah.
Symbiotic,
I'm
probably.
going to go on that. What do we do to have a symbiotic garden with critters to keep them from eating everything? So one of the biggest pests for strawberries are slugs and snails, and ants as well. Ants can be a big muncher. I've never seen lizards, albeit there might be in where you're from, Nancy. Um, in order to deal with that with strawberries in general, and in general terms, well, one is that the more moisture you have in your garden, the more rainfall you have, the larger volume of slugs and snails you're going to have, and therefore the more you're going to get damage. What there are different ways. If you're on a broad scale, you can work with integrating geese or ducks in the peripheries. You can fence them off with, I like to use electric fencing with my animals, and you can have them. Geese are neat because they won't often eat a lot of your produce. They can even kind of be willy-nilly in your system. You might want to manage that. If you don't want to go to animal husbandry, copper is interesting on a small scale. Copper, so I've been told, I've never experimented with it with slugs, but I have heard that you can use copper tape, which you can buy off of online vendors. You can wrap it around a vase, for example, where you might have your strawberries, and it's going to deter the snails from sliding up. And I like, if on a small scale growing strawberries, to grow them in raised beds or in pots, and that's going to keep them away from ants in particular, and will reduce the likelihood of snail damage. The other thing to consider, and this goes to your guys' work, Charlie and Lisa, is when you're doing pre-seed charging with pyramids, and if you guys have in the show notes your pyramids for sale or how to make them, if you charge your plants before you plant them out under a pyramid in the correct manner, you're going to reduce predation, and I've seen that firsthand with my own tinkering experiments.
Oh, that's awesome. I've caught a couple slugs on my strawberry plants the past few days, and it's been so wet here in Pennsylvania, so I totally understand why, but I've been wanting to try the copper because I've heard that too with the copper tape. Wrap it around your raised bed and they can't get through that because it burns them.
May I say one last thing and just give a little plug out to
Sure.
before we close? And if there's another question, there's time, I'm happy. But what I want to say, because you mentioned at the beginning that I'm a co-administrator of the largest Facebook electroculture community. We're almost 200,000 people. David and
Yeah.
David founded that. I came on board later. one of the most popular electroculture techniques are spiral antennas. And on another show we can talk about those and how to make them and what the mechanisms are, etc. But one of the things people often say is that spiral antennas reduce predation or eliminate it entirely. I think that's it's unfair to say that you can eliminate pests entirely. Nature has its way. And if you find a way to completely eliminate predators in general, I don't actually see that as a good thing, to be honest. I think finding a balance is the way to go. But on the topic of spiral antennas, and that's something that's wonderful to work with, and let's do that on our next call. We can talk about
Sure.
that.
Sure.
Spiral antennas are really a gateway to electroculture, and I've given you, Lisa, a link that you can put in the description below on Rumble and on YouTube.
Yep. All
Of
of your
a
links are in the
guide
description.
yep. that David and I have made. It's freely available. We do have a donation option. We encourage reviews if you like it. But it is a guide that goes through spiral antennas, and it's that gateway to electroculture. We also have the Facebook group there. And if anybody wants to find me, they can find me on the website there. And if you want to work with garden designs or other projects, I'm more than happy, and I'd love to hear from anybody from the audience here who might want to do some coaching or take their work further. Yeah. And maybe in the future, we'll collaborate together, Lisa, Charlie, on
Sure.
some kind of
Absolutely.
way that can help get that forward.
Yeah, it's a great community too, the Facebook community that you have developed with the electroculture. That's how Ray found me. I was in there commenting on some posts, and
I was like, I know who this person is. I love their work. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is very exciting because we do, I talk about this all the time. We have to take back control of our world.
Take
And
back control. That is epic.
one of the biggest ways is to take control of our health. You're the only one who truly knows your true health, and we have to start delving inside and connecting with nature again and just going back to our roots. And really, I think a lot of people are getting it, and it's really nice to see. My daughter's, I joke
so
around,
beautiful.
she's 29, and I tell her she's Amish all the time. She's canning now, she's growing her own garden, just making sourdough starter and kombucha, and I'm like, that's what needs to be done. That's awesome to see this
sprouting in the kitchen, and
Yep.
beautiful.
But it was great having you, Ray. Thanks so much, and we will definitely have you on again.
And I appreciate everything, and I agree wholeheartedly. Take back your control, and because there's so many things in the world right now to be saddened about and to be frustrated about. But if we dwell on anger, we dwell on anger in our hearts, if we hold on to that instead of empowering ourselves with creative expression, channeling that energy in some constructive way, we're not going to have a positive impact. So
Absolutely.
we need to break through from that anger, rise up to a place of love, and start to see the beauty unfold around us. And that's all we can do.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, lots of love to everybody, and we'll see you next week. We have another special guest then too. Take care.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.